All right, aloha and welcome to today's ANA webinar, Breaking Down the Super Circular. Today is January 8th, 2015, and it is currently 3 p.m. in the East Coast and 10 a.m. here in Hawaii, where we are hosting today's ANA National Webinar. So a little about ANA before we start. The Administration for Native Americans promotes self-sufficiency for Native Americans by providing discretionary grant funding for community-based projects and training and technical assistance to eligible tribes and Native organizations. And ANA's vision is that all Native communities are thriving. And so until that is accomplished, they will be working always on that mission. And their website is listed there on the page, www.acf.hhs.gov/program/ANA. And that's where you can go to learn more about ANA, to find out more about available funding opportunities, to find resources in their resource library, to sign up for events on their events page, or just to get general updates or contact information for calling the office. We have some upcoming ANA webinars. Every Thursday, for the most part, we have had webinars, but this year we might be doing things a little different. Our webinar schedule for the rest of the years is still being finalized, but the next one that we have planned, which many of you may want to attend, is on January 22nd, and that's on the Native Assets Building Initiative, or our NABI grant. And it's called the NABI, a tool for increasing family and community economic development. And this will be presented by the ANA Western region, and you can register on their website there, www.anawestern.org. Or you could go to the events page of the ANA website where you can find registration forms for all of the upcoming webinars and events that ANA produces throughout the nation. And this session is being presented by the ANA Pacific Region TTA Center. And we're based here in Hawaii, and we primarily help Native peoples in the Pacific, which includes Native Hawaiians, Chamorros, Native American Samoans, and other Native Pacific Islanders, as well as Alaska Natives and Native American Indians. And so to introduce the goals of today's webinar, I'm going to hand it off to today's presenter, Susan White. Susan is the Technical Assistant Specialist here in the Pacific Region TTA Center, and she has decades of experience working with the federal government, particularly on federal grants within Indian country and in the Pacific. And so Susan really brings a lot of experience to this, and particularly to things that are finance related, which the super circulars definitely are. So I'll hand it off to Susan and she can take it over from here. Susan?
Okay, thanks, Matt. All right, so the goals for the webinar today, one is we're just going to be, to introduce you to the new financial management regulations. Okay, and they've been codified for HHS in 45 CFR Part 75. I know a number of you were on our last webinar when we were talking about 2 CFR Part 200. And at that point, I said when it goes to codification, there'll be some, each one of the federal agencies will probably make some changes to it or, within the latitude that they have. And the Department of Health and Human Services has done that. And now where you'll find the regulations for Department of Health and Human Services is within 45 CFR Part 75. Remember, we used to go to Part 74 if we were a nonprofit, or Part 92 if we were a tribe. Now everybody will go to the same place, and it's 45 CFR Part 75. So that's the first thing. That's the most important thing, is now you'll know, the specifics for each one of your funding sources. So we want to go over them once again, and they're really, and you'll see exactly what you're going to be held to, or what the requirements are. Okay, the other thing is I want to talk about some key changes. And the key changes I'm talking about is from a year ago to today. It's from when you were in Part 74 or Part 92 to now when you're in Part 75. Because there aren't really a lot of changes from 2 CFR Part 200, the big super circular that everybody had to, adapt to what HHS. They did not incorporate a lot of changes at all. And I also want to talk about, there's some real key changes in here that do have an impact and that you really need to pay close attention to and start making some changes within your own internal systems on how you do certain things. So I'll point those out as we go through this. But we're just going to go through it, you guys. I don't know any easier way than just say, okay, this is what it is. Here's how it's laid out. This is what it is. All right. So as I was saying just a minute ago, we started out, 2 months ago, all we had was 2 CFR Part 200, right? Now we have 45 CFR Part 75. And now it flows down to you. And the reason now it flows down to you is because these took effect December 26, 2014. So they're in effect right now. So you're all going to be held to these requirements from now on. All right. Again, your grants, if they were issued last year, may still have the old ones in. Any new grant you get will have these in it. These will quote the new regulations. Right. And what it's doing, what happened is that 45 CFR Part 75 replaces Part 74 and Part 92. It also has brought in OMB circulars A87, 122, and A21. Remember, those are the cost principles. They're all housed within 45 CFR Part 75. And then it's also brought in the audit requirements of OMB A133. That's all in there now too. All right. And it's broken down into 5 or 6 parts, depending upon how you look at it. All right, we're going to go through each one of those parts. We'll probably spend most of our time on post-award because that's what, as you're managing your A&A grants, these are the regulations that are really impacting you the most. So we're going to dedicate most of our time today to that. And this was published in the December 19th, 2014 Federal Register. So it has come out, it's published, it's a done deal at this point. Now, one thing I really, really want to stress to you, because, we're spending an hour on it. I mean, I could spend days on it, but nobody'd stay on the webinar with me. But if you do have a question, at least you'll know where to go. And always go and look at the actual regulation. Don't just take some summary that I might have written or what's in this PowerPoint here. Say, if you want to know if you need to go in for a budget modification, go to the section that really speaks to it and look at the actual regulation. What we're hoping to accomplish here is, one, to give you just an idea of all the different pieces of information that are included in Part 75. And then so that way you'll know, yeah, there is something that addresses this. I have to watch out for this, and you know where to go if you have a specific question. I just can't stress that enough. Whenever questions come up, always go to the regs. Use this to help you get to the right place in the regs, but always go straight to the regulations. Right. And again, what was incorporated were the financial management regs, the cost principles, and the audit requirements. I think I've said that 3 times now, so I'm kind of beating it to death, but everything's all here now. So you're not going to go to OMBA 133 for any audits that you have for periods after the December 26th date. You'll start going to these regulations. Once your grants run out that reference the old cost principles, when you get your new grant awards, you'll start going to the cost principles. Okay. So here are the different sections. The first one is the acronyms and definitions. All right. The second one is general provisions. The third, is the pre-federal award requirements and the contents of federal awards. And that's like before you ever get your notice of grant award. There's certain things that apply before you ever get a notice of grant award. We're not going to spend much time on that. What we're going to spend most of the time on is the post-federal award requirements and the standards for financial and program management, because that's what you're dealing with right now as you're managing your grants. Okay, it's also good information as you're writing new proposals, because you'll know what your requirements are and you'll know what leeway you have. And then Part E is the cost principles, and Part F is the audit requirements. We're not going to spend much time on the cost principles or the audit requirements. So let's get going. Subpart A is just acronyms and definitions. All right. It's, you know, like ACF under the acronyms. It just tells what all the different acronyms are, because they'll be using it throughout the regulations. Excuse me. And then it has the definitions. And there's 99 definitions, but HHS added 8 new additional definitions that weren't in 2 CFR Part 200. And those are, you know, and they're nothing real major. They added a definition for awardee, commercial organization, the Departmental Appeals Board, excess property, expenditure report, grantee, HHS awarding agency, and principal investigator / program director. So, you know, it's just ones that they wanted further defined, like HHS awarding agency. Of course, that wouldn't be in 2 CFR Part 200 because that's the overall one for all agencies. But the definitions now, we have the same definitions for every non-federal entity. Okay, they've actually loosened up some of the definitions so that they could encompass everything, and it could be used in reference to all of the different sets of regs that they combined into this one regulation. A couple of the key definitions, or what I think are key definitions, okay, these are the ones that caught my attention, were fixed amount awards. It's a new type of grant award, and we're going to speak to that in a few minutes here. Then they also micro purchase, which is a new method for procurement, for purchasing, and we'll speak to that when we get into the procurement section. And they speak to performance goal, and I want to talk about that because that ties into the fixed awards, and it ties into some new requirements within the regulations. The other one is protected personally identifiable information. Yeah, I think that's a particularly important one, because you will have to have within your office or within your organizations, you're going to have systems to ensure that you are maintaining the confidentiality of information that can be used to distinguish or trace a person's identity. Like in our office here, in my office in Phoenix, what we've had to do, because we have a lot of participants, is that we've started double locking that information. So in addition to the office being locked, is behind a closed door that's also locked as well in a locked file cabinet, you know. So that one caught our attention right off the bat, that we really needed to beef that up. Okay, the general provisions, moving along to subpart B, the general provisions. All right. Basically what it says is it establishes authority for this, for Part 75. Okay, so that's the main thing, right? It also states that HHS awarding agencies will not impose additional or inconsistent requirements upon grantees, okay, unless it's based in the federal statute, regulation, or executive order, okay? Or say that OMB permits an exception, then that's okay. Or OMB approves information, you know. So those are the only times there can be inconsistent requirements. So they really kind of tightened up how much, you know, they're trying to standardize everything within the federal government, and they've really tightened up different programs, and that really kind of adding additional burden to the grantees, or different type, not necessarily additional, although in some cases it is, but maybe requiring information in different ways. They're trying to keep it as standard as possible. Okay, then subpart C, this is the pre-award, pre-federal award requirements. And basically what we're going to find in there is when are they going to use a grant agreement as opposed to a cooperative agreement, as opposed to a contract. Okay, because there's differences in each one of those instruments, such as a grant agreement, you know, the grantee is totally responsible. With a cooperative agreement, the awarding agency will be a partner in it, and you'll have equal say, not equal say, but you'll both be working together on accomplishing whatever that project is. And then a contract, of course, is performance-based. So they speak to what's to be included in the notices of funding opportunity, you know, so they're standardizing how those FOAs will come out in the future. They also talk about the federal agency review of merit. They're talking about with competitive. Now, this is with competitive awards, you know, how about that review, how those reviews take place. It's very interesting because when you read it closely, A&A has been doing it for years, the way that they're starting to require it to be done. So I thought that was interesting. Now, here's the one thing that I think is really key. So this, you know, really pay attention to this, is they are going to require a federal agency to do a review of risk prior to issuing awards for all future awards. So that means that, your organizations need to be ready, you know, to go through those review of risks. Now, none of us have seen them, unless you have some justice grants, because they've always done that. But now all federal agencies are going to be doing that. And what they're going to be looking at is financial stability. So make sure that your financial statements are current, up to date, and clean and healthy, right? They're going to be looking at your different management systems. And that would be like your personnel policies, your financial policies and procedures, that type of thing. They'll be looking at the history of performance, your history of performance on other awards. So you're going to want, or maybe you don't want to, this is just kind of Susan White talking. What I would do, you know, is probably at the end of each, and it's as new for me as it is for all of you, at the end of each grant award that I've had or each project, I'd probably write up a 1 or 2 page summary about what the requirements were, what the deliverables were, you know, and how we met those, and just keep that in a historical file so that I would have that available to show, you know, my history of performance. They will be looking at reports and audit findings. So, you know, your audits, they need to be as clean as possible, right? And your ability to implement statutory, regulatory, and other requirements. So again, this is going to be a requirement of the federal agencies. So, you know, be prepared to assist them in this review, you know, just like keeping a history of your performance, you know, having copies of your financial and personnel policies, and make sure they're up to date, not something that's been sitting on a shelf for 15 years that you haven't, nobody even knows what the forms are that are in them. All right. And then also, you know, really work hard on your audits to keep those real clean moving forward. Okay, also in the pre-award requirements, they talk about the standard application requirements and the different forms. They talk about special award conditions. Okay, and this would be, you know, if they find something in the pre-award review, the special award conditions would be like kind of what we called the high risk in the past, or that. And they can put special conditions on your awards, such as additional reporting, you know, provide required training and technical assistance, things like that. They also speak to what information will be contained in all federal awards. So that's more for the grants officer and things like that, but you'll know what to look for. If you know that, then you know what to look for that's going to be in your award. And then if you go to, at the end of this, there's a number of appendices, and Appendix 1 talks about the full text of the Notice of Funding Opportunity. Appendix 2, now if you do a lot of contracting, I really recommend that you get familiar with this, because there are certain contract provisions that have to be in all contracts you issue if the money comes from a federal award. So you need to look at that, see if it applies. But now there always was, but now we see it even more strongly, that there are certain contract provisions that have to be included in your contracts if that's something you do, you know, in operating your project. All right. Now we get to the big stuff, you guys, the post-award post-federal award requirements. This is what goes on the day one after you get your notice of grant award. If it started on September 30th, you know, these requirements will start on September 30th. And again, remember, they probably won't start till September 30th of 2015 for many of you, although you need to have within your organization systems in place for these right now. Okay, this is a big one. This is another big new one, all right? And that's performance measurement. Now they're requiring that you relate financial data to performance accomplishments. Okay, so they're going to have to start requiring the grantee to relate their financial data to their performance accomplishments of the federal award. Well, what is that and what does that mean? Basically, what that is that you're going to have to start looking, what does it cost you to train a language teacher? I mean, right now is just a great time for grantees, because you get to decide what, you know, your performance, what performance indicators you're going to use to cost out. It could be, what does it cost to put on a workshop? It could be if you're doing let's say you're doing a micro business or a business incubator program. What does it cost you to provide the support to a potential business owner to get them through the course and ready to start business? There's some, you know, so you really want to get some real basic data elements that you're going to use and play around with it this year. And then how are we going to cost that out? To me, it'd be pretty easy. Like if I'm, you know, going to have 100 participants in my program and they're all doing the same thing, I'm going to do cost per participant. But if you've got a couple different deliverables, a couple of objectives with really different deliverables, you're going to need to start working out ways to attach the dollars spent to that. So you got some time to play around with that. So I really recommend that you finance and program work together and start thinking about how you're going to do that. Okay, right now before you have to, all right? And then it's when applicable, you're going to have to provide cost information to demonstrate cost-effective practices. And that ties into the first point. And then one thing they're looking for is that performance should be measured in a way that will help the federal awarding agency and other NFEs, non-federal entities, okay, to improve program outcomes, shared lessons learned, and spread the adoption of promising practices, which is great. Remember that as you're starting to write your new proposals too, because they're going to be looking for that, and maybe put a couple activities in that address that, because you know, you're aligning yourself with the regulations, and it's easier to plan time for those activities than to, you know, when someone wants you to write it up later or that. So that's a big new one. That's the biggest new one in post-award, I think. Okay, the financial management system. This is still pretty close to what it used to be. Although they have changed it around a little bit. They speak to, you have to have procedures for retention, methods of transfer, transmission, and storage of information. Okay, we always spoke to retention, you know, records retention. Now we need to speak to methods of transfer, transmission, and then of course storage. All right. This one we've always had, identification in its accounts of all federal awards received and expended, and the federal programs under which they were received and the money was expended, okay? Accurate, current, and complete disclosure of financial results of each federal award or program. We always had that. And this is a big one, though. This is what we spend a lot of our time in accounting doing, making sure that our financial records are accurate, current, which means that we need to pull the travel expense reports out of the staff, and complete. All of the accounts have to be in it. Everything has to be in it, okay? And this one is a carryover from before, records that identify the source and application of funds. It's just like, say that you have an economic development project and you getting funding from A&A and funding from EDA and funding from a foundation. Even though they're all going towards that same economic development project, you're going to have to be able to identify whose funds are whose and what each funds were spent on. But we've always had that, so you guys should be up on and handle that one easily. Effective control and accountability for all funds, property, and other assets. Okay, this is another one that we've always had. And this is all our internal controls, you know, such as our purchase orders that we use, where a couple people sign off on it. Property, where we tag the property, we do an inventory on the property every year. Okay, and any other assets that you might have, such as inventories of maybe books or training curriculum, things like that. Tools, you know, our computers, although those, you know, might not, they may or they may not be classified, we still would want to have, you know, a control over and accountability for all that. But we've had that one always too. And then comparison of expenditures with budgeted amounts. We've always had that. Remember, you have to do it on a periodic basis. It doesn't say what that periodic basis should be. It could be monthly, quarterly, biannually, or annually, at least once a year. I think it should be monthly because that's how you make appropriate adjustments, but that's Susan White talking, okay? So your organization has to determine what those periodic timeframes are, okay? Written procedures to implement the payment requirements, and that's just to minimize the time elapsing between receipt of federal funds and expenditure of those funds. And we've always had that, all right? And then written procedures for determining the allowability of costs in accordance with the cost principles. They kind of expanded on this one a little bit. It used to say, you know, you had to comply with the cost principles, but now it added that written procedures. So you may want to throw a line in your financial policies and procedures. Whoever's doing one of the reviews, you know, will ensure that it is allowable under the allowable costs of that agency. Something worded much better, but something along those lines. But those are the standards now. Okay, internal controls, they speak a lot to internal controls. And probably the reason for this is because from all the audits I've reviewed, this is the most common finding. Okay, so they speak to your standards for internal controls. And when we look at the standards, if we look at COFAR and what they're talking about, you know, do you do a risk assessment to ensure, you know, that you aren't going to do anything wrong, you know, that you have control over the funds, the property, and other assets? Do you have certain control activities? And again, I spoke to those just a minute ago, whether it be the purchase orders, whether it be the tagging, you know, what are your activities that ensure control over that? You know, is there information on how you control it and what your internal controls are? And that's in your, you know, financial policies and procedures. And then how are you monitoring the internal control? How are you making sure that you follow it? The procedures that your agency has and ensuring that there is control. So that, you know, really want to look closely at your financial policies and procedures and what you have in there for internal controls, you know, and maybe you want to beef that up, or maybe they're good as it is, or maybe you've made some changes and they're just not reflected in your written policies, and you'll want to make that happen as soon as possible. Right. Next thing is payments, and nothing has really happened too much with payments. You have to minimize the time elapsing between receipt and disbursement of funds. The one thing though, and this is on interest on, if you get advances, any interest that is earned on that, you get to keep $500, the first $500 of interest for administration. And if you earn more than $500 in interest on an advance, you have to send it back to the Division of Payment Management Services. So, you know, my question is, if you're making more than $500 on interest, you got way too much of an advance out there, you know, for the kind of grants we get. I'm sure for some of the large state grants and that, maybe not, but they comply with a different act. So anyway, that threshold got raised. There used to be 2 different thresholds. Now there's just 1. Cost sharing and matching, this is the same as it used to be. It has to be verifiable. So our records, you know, our source documentation for our cost sharing or matching should look like any other expenditure. Okay, it can't be included for other awards. You can't say, oh, this car that was donated to us, we're going to use it for A&A, and we're also going to use it for Head Start. You know, you could prorate it between the 2, but you can't use the same thing for that. They have to be necessary and reasonable, and that ties into our cost principles. They have to be allowable under the cost principles. So, you know, one of the things that isn't allowable is goods and services for personal use, and they mean personal staff use. Well, you can't use that as a non-federal share or a matching share as well. You know, that what's approved in the cost principles applies both to the federal dollars and to the cost sharing or matching dollars, the non-federal dollars. And it has to be provided for in the budget. Okay, so you all do budgets that show you non-federal share. It has to be in that budget. Okay, program income hasn't changed much at all. We still have our 3 methods of a deduction, addition, cost sharing, or matching. So those are always it. The default is deduction. So that means that if you, well, first of all, let me tell you, program income, what program income is any income that is generated as a result of a grant-funded activity, all right? So if you have a project, let me go back to my business incubators and say that you develop some curriculum and the project is still live and active, and a tribe says, oh, we want to buy that curriculum from you. And you say, oh, okay, well, we'll charge you $2,000 for it. And then you just send them a PDF file of it. All right. That $2,000 becomes program income. That's one example of it. Okay. Now, if there's nothing mentioned in your notice of grant award, it falls into the deduction. It falls into what's called the deduction. Okay. So that means if you had a $100,000 grant to do your business incubator and you got $2,000 in program income, you now have a $98,000 federal grant. Now, A&A does not use that deduction, but a key point here is always know how program income will be treated from whoever your potential funding sources are. And make sure you know that going out, even if you don't plan on getting any. What A&A does is they use the addition method. And the addition method means that I've got my $100,000 for my business incubator project. I generated $2,000 in program income. I now have $102,000 to spend on that project, okay? And you'll see that on your notice of grant award in box, I think it's box 21. It'll say addition. And check to make sure, okay? And then the third method is cost sharing or matching. Now you can use program income as part of your match, but you know, like say that you say, I'm going to generate 10,000 and that's going to be part of my, you know, 20% non-federal share. Okay, you can do that. You can do that. Okay, now this is Susan White talking again, okay? I don't recommend doing that because you may think you're going to get that 10,000, and what happens if you don't get it? You're short 10,000 for your non-federal share. Okay, I just think it's kind of like playing Russian roulette a little bit. You know, we always think things are going to happen, but in the course of, you know, managing our projects, things change. Things change. Now, the one thing they did add to the regulations, though, is that if you are using matches, cost sharing or matching, and say you say I'm going to use 10,000, and you actually generate 12,000, okay, your federal award will be deducted by that $2,000. All right, so even another good reason not to use it for cost sharing or matching. But program income's a good thing. It's a good thing. That's how we get sustainable projects, is to start generating revenue sources for it. Okay, revisions of the budget and program plans. Okay, this is when you need to go in for a formal revision, all right? If you do a change in the scope or objective of the project. Good luck with that one in A&A, okay? That's a big one, okay? If there's a change in key personnel, and it depends on who you've classified as key personnel, the project director or principal investigator, you know, are always key personnel. And other than that, HHS allows you to identify if you have any other key personnel. I say keep it simple. You know, because if you do have a turnover in the project director or principal investigator, you will have to go in for a modification. If the key personnel is going to be gone for 3 months or 25% of time, right? Because that, you know, that jeopardizes the project. If you're going to transfer funds budgeted for participant support costs, and participant support costs are, you know, there's a real good definition for that in the regulations. And I'm going to give it to you because a lot of people thought anything we spent on the participant was participant support costs. What they're talking about, it means direct costs for items such as stipends or subsistence allowance, travel allowance, and registration fees paid to or on behalf of participants or trainees in connection with conferences or training projects. Yeah, that's a real tight line item. You can't move money there at all without a modification. Okay, if you're going to contract out the work and you didn't have that approved in your application. So say you decided intake could better be done by another organization and you want to contract, you have a NAVI grant, and you want to contract that out to somebody else. Okay, that is going to require a modification if it was not in your grant application. Okay. Changes in the amount of approved cost sharing or matching. That also requires a formal modification. Just stick with your 20%, okay? HHS awarding agencies have authority to waive certain prior approvals. Okay, they put that in there so that they, you know, they can give some waivers when it's allowed. All right. If you're going to go in and ask for costs incurred 90 days prior to your award, good luck with that, you guys. You know, A&A calls you to negotiate and you go, hey, you know, about a month ago we got these costs, will you cover them? But there are some federal agencies that do that, but not A&A. I don't recall seeing A&A ever doing that. They may have, but I certainly haven't seen it. Okay, if you want a no-cost extension to initiate an extension of the period of performance, what we call a no-cost extension, we've always had to go in for that. If you want carryover or carry forward, you know, if you want carryover into the new year, that's always required, you know, a modification. Okay, the HHS awarding agencies may restrict the transfer of funds if the amount exceeds $150,000 or 10% of the total budget amount. So we don't know where that's at. We won't see till the new awards come out. Or hopefully for those of you that are going to the grantee meeting, Tim Chappelle is going to be doing this workshop with me in Santa Fe, and we can ask him about that one. All right. Or if you have a need for additional funds, that will require a formal modification. That's another good luck with that one. I can see call, hey, you know, I'm going to need another 100,000, you know. But sometimes there is extra money and you can get it. I mean, if you do need it, ask. I mean, all I can say is no, but maybe some money might become available. You never know. But it will require, you know, a formal modification. You'll get a new notice of grant award, you know, with the additional funds in it. Okay, so these are the basic ones. You know, I've got all the basic ones in there. Again, in your notice of grant award, you'll see if there's anything else. But that gives you a good idea, a good feel for what kind of flexibility you have within your projects. Equipment hasn't changed at all. Okay, basically the use of equipment is to be used by the project that purchased it. Can anybody else use it? Yes, another federally funded project if it's not needed by the project that purchased it. You know, and this could even be on a short-term thing. Say that you have a Title VI program for your elders, and they have a band that they pick the elders up Monday through Friday. And maybe there's a youth program that's funded that has a weekend activity. Yes, they would be eligible to use it. They'd have to pay the costs for their use of it, but yeah, as long as the elders didn't need it, they could use it. Okay, the management and maintenance, you still have to have written procedures for management and maintenance of the equipment. You still have to maintain property records on all equipment. And you have to have a control system in place. Again, we keep seeing all these controls, internal controls, which we've always had to have, but they're really emphasizing it now. And you have to have disposition procedures. All right, you have to have disposition procedures. Now, equipment is classified as any item with an acquisition cost of $5,000 or higher. That hasn't changed. Now, if your tribe or organization defines equipment at a lower dollar threshold, you will have to follow all of these regulations for that lower dollar threshold. Well, let me talk about equipment a little bit more. Be sure that you take a look at the property records and what's required to have on it, because there's some weird stuff that's required, and that didn't change at all. To be honest with you, it's like the ones that most people don't have is the source of funding. Put the grant number down there. Who holds the title? You know you hold the title, but just put it in your property record. All right. The percent of federal participation, you know, it's usually 100%. Put that in your property record. And then the use and condition, keep updating that condition. If a vehicle is 5 years old, it's not excellent anymore, all right, in excellent condition. Okay, and then the other ones everybody usually has: description, serial number, acquisition date, acquisition cost, location, and disposition. So make sure that you have the proper property records. Okay, supplies, that hasn't changed at all. Title vests with the tribe or organization. If when your project ends and your inventory exceeds $5,000 fair market value, okay, you have to get disposition instructions from HHS awarding agency. And again, that's fair market value. Now, this is a new section. This is one that I really need to get a lot more familiar with. They talk about, they used to briefly talk about it, but now there's a lot more. They talk about intangible property, and that's like copyrights, patents, things of that nature. Title does vest with the tribe or the organization, but they're really placing, you know, because a lot more, not emphasis, but they're dedicating time in the regulations to it, where they didn't used to. It was just kind of a passing phrase. Okay, procurement standards, everybody's favorite, second most common audit finding. All right. First of all, you have to have written procurement procedures. We've always had to have that. Written standards of conduct. We've always had to have that. Purchases have to comply with your policies and procedures. So you can't just write them, you got to follow them. Purchases have to be necessary. We've always had that. You have to provide for open competition. We've always had that. A new one is you have to have a written conflict of interest policy, and that's organizational conflict of interest policy. All right. I think what happened is that some nonprofits, I hate to blame it on the nonprofits, maybe it's everywhere and I just happen to know the nonprofits better. They started starting up for-profit businesses within their nonprofits and then funneling work to them without bidding it out. So, you know, I saw that in several cases, so maybe it comes from something like that, but I don't know. I wasn't involved in the discussions, so, but that just makes sense to me. You have to have proper documentation for the purchases, and we've always had that. And you have to have maintenance of records, and we've always had that. So that much hasn't changed. Now here comes the big change, you guys. They have a new method of purchasing. Okay, remember we always had the 4 methods, now we've got 5. And the new one is called a micro purchase, which is equal to or less than $3,000. So there's really very little around that. You are able to, any purchase of supplies that doesn't exceed $3,000, and that's in the aggregate, you guys. Don't keep everything you buy under $3,000. It's $3,000 for the year, all right? Based on how you buy things, all right? You can just go ahead and purchase it. And then all they want you to do is, make sure that you have qualified suppliers, and that you spread the purchases amongst those suppliers. But, none of this old cost quotation stuff in that. Okay, now we have small purchases, and they increase the simplified acquisition threshold to 150,000. So between 3,000 and 150,000, you can be in small purchase, all right? But again, that has to be supported within your tribe or organization. So your financial policies and procedures have to say this as well. If they still say 25,000, then you're stuck with you're held to the 25,000. So, but small purchase procedures with that, it doesn't require the elaborate bidding that a competitive solicitation does, or a sealed bid. Basically, you still have to get price quotes. You still have to have a good specification of what it is that you want to buy. All right. And then you just need to get it from an adequate number of qualified sources. And it could be quotations. It's not the whole formal advertise, that type of thing. So, I'd have a good procedure in place where I have qualified, bidders or qualified vendors that I've already vetted, and then just a real simple way where they could give me quotes or that, depending upon what it is that you're purchasing. Now, sealed bids, we're into large purchase procedures again, and this is for purchases 150,000 and higher. And you're either going to do a sealed bid, which means low cost wins, or you're going to do a competitive proposal, which you can take into consideration factors in addition to cost. All right. And then we still have our non-competitive purchases, the old sole source, where you can use those. There's certain cases when that can be used. If the item's only available from a single source, if there's a public emergency, if it's authorized by your funder, or after you've tried, you've gone out, you've advertised, you've tried, there isn't any, you're only getting one. Competition is inadequate. So we now have the 5. So that's pretty big. One thing that I really want to stress here, please listen to this, is that remember, you're supposed to be implementing these regulations within your organization or your tribe December 26, 2014. Now, they will give you a 1-year grace period to implement new procurement procedures, which pretty much everybody needs, in from what I've seen so far. The only thing you have to do, though, is that there has to be a document on file stating that you are going to take that 1-year grace period. It can be, a resolution from the board or from the council. It can be an executive order from the executive director. Just get that piece of paper on file if you're taking this year to update your procurement procedures. So some people are going to leave theirs as they are. Others are going to take advantage of some of the new flexibilities. If that's the case and you haven't written new procurement procedures yet, get that piece of paper stating that you're going to take the 1-year grace period for implementation of the new procurement procedures. Okay, financial reporting, that hasn't changed. We're still using the 425 no less frequently than annually, no more frequently than quarterly. You can see that A&E is going to biannually this year on the new grants. So, and monitoring and reporting program performance. Okay, basically you have to assure compliance. All right. And reports can be required no less frequently than annually, no more frequently than quarterly. Okay. And then there is a section on reporting on real property. What's the big stuff, you guys? Okay. Then they speak to records retention, and that really hasn't changed too much at all. Still the 3 years from when you file the final financial status report, 3 years from the date you dispose of equipment, 3 years from the final day covered by a cost allocation plan, 3 years from when you get your final rate on indirect cost. Okay, they do add a new section on methods for collection, transmission, and storage of information. Okay, and it encourages that the information be in open, machine-readable format. All right, and then they talk about remedies for non-compliance. We're not going to go there because all of you are in compliance, I'm sure. Termination of a grant and closeout of a grant. So all of that is under post-award. Now in subpart E, they start going into the cost principles. And this has not changed. It has to be necessary, reasonable, okay, conform to cost principles of the federal award, consistent treatment in accordance with generally accepted accounting principles, and adequately documented. That's always been there. That hasn't changed at all. They've done a lot of work in the area of indirect costs. Okay, a lot of work in the area of indirect costs. Before, it was real sketchy what was in the cost principles. Now there's really good information on indirect and how to prepare it and what's required. Now, a couple new things did happen. One, they do allow for a one-time extension for up to 4 years on any current indirect cost rate. So if, say, in next year you've got a current rate and you want to go 4 years and get it extended, you'll live with it for 4 years, but or you can ask for it for a different period, but they do allow for that once. Here's the best thing I think that happened. For smaller organizations that do not already have an indirect cost rate, they will allow for a de minimis rate of 10%. So I think that's pretty cool. I think that's pretty cool so that you don't have to go through. I mean, I just submitted my indirect cost proposal Monday, and it's, you know, I mean, it takes a couple weeks to get one of those ready. It's very arduous. So I think that's great for the smaller organizations. So that to me is a big deal, a big change. Okay, the selected items of cost. Remember, those of you that have known me, we always had those 3 tables. If you're a tribe, you follow this. If you're a nonprofit, you follow this. If you're a college or university, you follow this. Now everybody's got the same one. Still have the same classifications. It's allowable with prior approval, or it's not allowable. So some of the examples of things like allowable, you know, fringe benefits, paying people salaries, conferences, depreciation expense, transportation. Some that are allowable with prior approval is equipment, fundraising, investment costs, organizational costs, sales and marketing. Certain things that are not allowable, contributions, donations, alcohol, commencement, convocation. But everybody's got the same ones now. We can talk from the same set of rules for everybody and the same selected items of cost. Remember, before some had certain items, others didn't have them. So now that's really good. I think that's really, really good. It really standardizes a lot of things. Okay. Now, when you look at the cost principles, you do need to, I want you to read if you're going to use this, because they do have a lot of restrictions around them, around conferences, employee morale, relocation expenses, and student activities. Okay, just wanted to alert you to that. Okay, the audit requirements, don't worry, I'm not taking you through an audit, you guys. You don't need to hold your breath. First of all, for audits for the period starting after December 26th, going forward, They've raised the threshold from $500,000 to $750,000 in federal expenditures from all programs, you know, for the requirement of a single audit. So that's happened. Okay, audits have to be conducted annually. There's two very weird exceptions. If you were a nonprofit on biennial audits in 1987 to something, I don't know what they are. You have to read them, but they're really bizarre. They're really weird. They happened back in the 80s and stuff, and 90s, I think. And then, of course, this has always been the case. Your audit has to be submitted within 30 days from the receipt of the audit report or within 9 months after the end of the audit period. There's a lot more information about audits in 45 CFR Part 75. Okay, basically, if we look at how the audits have kind of morphed, one, they're trying to focus on where the greatest risks of waste or fraud or abuse is. They want federal agencies to rely on the single audits. Okay, so that they'll feel comfortable with audits and not be sending their own program auditors out there. Audits will be made public. Okay, tribes can opt out of that, but for everybody else, audits will be made public. You send it to the clearinghouse. There's going to be a cooperative approach between the government and the grantee to audit resolution. And they want to target oversight resources where they have the most risk. So that's kind of, as you read through all the different audit requirements and standards and that's kind of really where it headed. Okay. And now there's a lot of appendices, and I promise you we're not going into any of them. Remember I told you the first one was what's the content of a FOA. The second one, appendices 2, is the contract provisions that have to be included if you guys award contracts. Appendices 3 is indirect costs for institutions of higher education, your colleges and universities. 4 is indirect costs for nonprofits. 5 addresses cost allocation plans for governmentals. Okay, 6 is public assistance cost allocation plans. They talk about that. I haven't read that one yet. Okay, 7 is indirect cost proposals for governmentals. 8 is organizations. There's like 33 or some it says right there, a list of 33 nonprofit organizations that are exempt from the cost principles, and 9 is the hospital cost principles for hospitals. All right. As I said about 8 times now, they became effective December 26, 2014. They apply to awards made on or after that date. So you guys have to have your systems in place now to deal with any new awards you get. If you have a continuation grant, it's going to be up to the funding agency whether they're going to modify your terms and conditions or just keep you on the regs they had you on when you got your year 1. And then the audits is effective, just like I just now said, for any periods after December 26. So the audit period has to start. Like if you have a January 1 corporate date, and that's the first day of your your corporate fiscal year, this will apply to your audits for 2015, right? I think the biggest thing from a lot of this is my takeaway on it, is that because of that risk assessment they're doing now, we want audits to be clean. They're very important. Okay, and we want to document how successfully we've implemented other federally funded projects. I think that's important. Moving forward, in securing resources. Some of the key points from this is there's now one set of regulations for all non-federal entities. I think the new regulations clarify just a lot of areas. I like the new regulations personally. I think they've clarified. I think they did an excellent job on them. Risk assessments, which I've now told you about 12 times, will be done before you get an award. We're going to have to start relating performance accomplishments to financial data. Oh, I didn't tell you guys about the new fixed amount awards. They're going to have some grant awards called fixed amount awards. So like if you get a grant award for $10,000 and you have to like say produce a curriculum, you get paid the 10th. If you produce that curriculum and it's accepted by the awarding agency, you get paid the $10,000 no matter how much you spent on it. It's kind of like the fixed price contract. You can either make money on it or you can lose money on it. All right. So that's a new type of award. And I think they address intellectual property in detail now. I think they've, which, has been floating around for about 10 years now and really not addressed thoroughly. So I think they've done a good job with that. And with that, we're done, you guys. Let's turn it back to Matt, okay, for questions.
Thanks, Susan. Yeah, thank you for all of that. That was a really in-depth look at the new federal regulations, super circular. And there are people in the room who are at different levels here. So I know some of you are like, we're already really familiar with, OMB regulations and different cost principles. And some of us are starting from having no knowledge. So we tried to find a balance, and I think Susan did a great job of doing that. So we have a lot of questions that have been coming in during the session. So I'm just going to go back and start reading those questions for Susan in the order that they were received. And so the first question that I had was from Patty, Patty Schwallenberg, and Patty asked, will each funding agency be developing their own process for implementing 75.205? And this might be helpful if we go back to that section.
Yeah. Oh, the review of risk. Okay.
Yep, here we go.
Okay, so what is that again, Matt?
Will each funding agency be developing their own process for implementing 75.205?
Yeah, I think they will, Patty. I mean, I don't know. I mean, each federal agency will have to, how they're going to do that. I really don't know at this point how they're going to do that. I think a lot of this stuff we're going to see as it rolls out. But, I mean, it may be like if we look at ACF or HHS, maybe ACF will have one way of doing it and NIH will have another. I just don't know. I honestly don't know on that. I think now is a good time for us to get ready because I haven't seen any policies on that at all yet.
There's one more question about that same point, and it's from Jilla. Can we put anything in the proposal that addresses 75.205 before the grantor asks for it?
Well, yeah, there's a couple things you can do. When you're writing your A&A, you have that one section on organizational capabilities. It wouldn't hurt to say, our organization has accomplished 100% of the deliverables for all programs or, something like that. I mean, I wouldn't, elaborate or try to circumvent any process they're having, but you can put a few sentences in there that kind of give them a level of confidence in you, but, not the grapes of wrath, Jilla.
And then, yeah, Patty followed up to that and said, so it would probably be a good idea to keep in touch with our federal program contacts to make sure we're kept in the loop on this. Yeah, that would probably be a good proactive
Absolutely.
thing.
Yeah. I think that's kind of everybody's strategy right now is trying to, as they roll out their, how their implementation of these new regs, what it's going to look like.
Okay, and Leslie had another question regarding that same point on review of risk. How does 75.205 impact a tribe's sovereignty?
Oh, I don't think it impacts it at all, Leslie. They wouldn't touch that. I think it's just more or less, I think, they're going to have to deal with that. And they can't touch sovereignty over something like this. This is Susan White talking, though. So, I'm certainly, that would take a lawyer, a legal definition, but personally, I don't see them,
Okay, so the next question comes from Patty regarding 75.301, which is on the screen now. Is the reference to relating financial data specific to the federal award amount?
I think, again, I would think it would be, but I have no idea at this point until we see what they're going to ask for. Since nobody's asked for that, yeah, I just can't say it, They may have, you may have general, general and then certain things for certain performances. I'm sorry, you guys, I really don't know, until we see somebody asking for that information and what they're asking for.
So that might relate to Marcelina's question about the same point, which is, do we still draw down money based on reimbursement, or do we draw down money based on deliverables
Oh, no,
only?
you draw down money the same way you always have, based on what your expenditures are. This has no relationship to the cash management. So,
Well, thanks for that clarification. Um, we have some questions from Jilla. Jilla, maybe you can contact our office and we can help you with that as part of your application. Um, okay, so Jilla has a question. If A&A considers program income as addition, do we need to include the PI in the budget?
that's a good question, Jilla. Because they ask you for your federal and your non-federal. We need to get clarification on that, Jill. I've never seen it in a budget, but we need to get clarification on that. I don't think so, but I'm not qualified to say. We'll have to ask A&A that.
Contact our office, Jilla, and we'll help you one-on-one with those questions and anything else regarding your application. Okay. Patty had a question about, what does NFE stand for, and Rondell answered that, non-federal entity. And you can find all of the acronyms in, which section was that, Susan, where the acronyms are?
That's the first section.
Yep, in the first
Acronyms
section.
and definitions, subpart A.
Okay. Okay, so Jilla has a question. Is sole sourcing allowed on micro and small purchases?
Well, again, Jilla, for the micro purchases, they say that you should spread it around. You don't have to do a lot of things. It's 3,000 total in the aggregate, but you should through to qualified vendors. Okay, under the small purchase procedures, they still have some requirements, around that you do have to get price or rate quotations. So sole sourcing, you're going to have to treat it exactly as a sole source, where you're not going to compete and get approval on that or get prior approval on it.
Okay, thanks, Susan. All right, so this next question comes from Patty. Can you provide clarification on the requirement that performance accomplishment be related to financial data? Does this mean that our report should be organized by project objective?
No, until you hear from the funding sources as to what they want, there's no change. No, it's a requirement, Neil, but until you get guidance from your funding source, we really don't know how they're going to ask for that information or when they're going to ask for that information. So no, not at all.
Thank you. Okay, and Jilla, for Jilla, for your next question, you can contact our office as well. And the next question comes from Patty again. On the fixed amount awards, if there are funds left over, are these then considered unrestricted and available for use as a match on future projects?
Yeah, that's how it reads. Yeah, absolutely. That's exactly how that regulation reads.
Yeah, good idea. And so that's all the questions we have now. Let's see, we're a little over time, so if anyone has any other questions, you can type that in now. I'll wait a few seconds, otherwise we'll close the webinar.
And I'm sorry I went long, you guys, but it's really hard to bring this down.
Have one last question. Lisa asks, I guess she states that she'd like to have more information regarding the unanswerable question PI to all participants. And
Oh, okay, about
maybe
whether it goes into budget or not, Lisa? Yeah.
regarding
Yeah,
our
okay.
program.
We can do that. We just need to track down Tim Chappelle.
And I'll be sending a follow-up email to after this session is done, and we'll try and look for some of those answers. But we'll email everyone at the email address that you signed up with. So if you didn't register for this session, then just go back to the registration form and put your email address in there, and and I'll send it to you there. So at this point, we're going to close out the webinar. So just to recap, our goals today were to introduce people to the newly reorganized and consolidated 45 CFR Part 75, which is our new super circular, and now we're all in there. To review subsections and key changes from the previous regulations, and I feel like Susan did a pretty good job of doing that, a really great job of doing that, and to highlight the impact the key changes will make to ANA grantees. And thank you for a lot of your questions, which helped us to make those connections, the ones that Susan didn't explicitly do already. So thank you very much, Susan, for providing your expertise during this session. Next, let's see, this is 2 weeks from now, we'll be having a webinar on the NABI grant, which is one of ANA's funding opportunities regarding native asset building. And that will be presented by the ANA Western Region. You can sign up for that session by visiting their website, www.anawestern.org. Or you can visit the events page of the ANA website. So we have a few resources that you might be interested in if you want to learn more about what was presented at today's session. So if you want the direct citation and want to read it in its entirety, the 45 CFR Part 75, you can visit ecfr.gov. And if you guys don't know, that's a place where you can look up regulations and check citations for yourself. And so that is now, the new regulations are there, uploaded to ecfr.gov, and you can find that as well as any other federal regulation on that website. We also have a summary handout PDF, which is basically a print document that includes an itemized list of all of the parts of 45 CFR Part 75, and as well as some of the key changes from the old regulations to what we have now. And so that document, you can actually download that now if you want. If you look up at the top right corner of this webinar screen, you'll see a little box that says download the handouts here. Just click the one you want and then click download file, and you'll get that document onto your computer. You should be directed to download it. And also available in that box is the PowerPoint that we used in today's session. So that will remain on the screen for the rest of the session, even after I close it. And you might also want to visit the Council on Financial Assistance Reform website if you're really hardcore about this stuff and you want to see some of the process that led up to the consolidation and how we got to this point at the super circular. So to visit that, you can go to their website there, cfo.gov/COFAR, Council on Financial Assistance Reform, for the very hardcore of you. So with that, I'd like to close the session and just once again thank Susan for providing her expertise for today's webinar. And her contact information is there on the screen. I'll leave this slide up as you exit the webinar, so feel free to copy this down and contact her with your questions. And I'll also leave the handouts box up here, so feel free to click on the handout you want in the box on the upper right, click download file, and get those things. And so I'm going to stop the recording now. Once again, the recording will be available in about 2 weeks once we've had a chance to transcribe them and upload them to YouTube. So thank you for participating in today's webinar, Breaking Down the Super Circular. Today's January 8th, 2015, and this session has been provided by the ANA Administration for Native Americans and hosted by the ANA Pacific Region Training and Technical Assistance Center. Thank you very much.